Hello everyone and welcome back to Final Fight. We're starting out in the bonus round this time because trying to do this as Hager is a little difficult. As it said, all we have to do is break the glass, and I think that jump kicks are the key here because they allow you to cover more ground much faster. There we go. And now it's finally time for the final stage of Final Fight, Uptown. This is where we will confront Belger and, kick him to death. Unfortunately, aside from an increase in barrels, there's not really any new design in this stage. We're all out in the design department. So let's use this opportunity to talk about the game as a whole, instead of just this stage. Depending on who you talk to, Final Fight is considered either an indisputable classic or a monstrous quarter muncher. This is almost entirely due to the design, which is, well, yeah, rather unforgiving. In most beat-em-ups, the desperation attack is kind of an extra. It's something to get you out of tricky situations, but in the original Final Fight, the desperation attack is a necessity. It has an incredibly wide area of effect, it gives you a lot of invincibility frames, and, well, it only takes a little bit off your health, just a tiny bit. But there's still that feeling that, you should be able to make it through the game without using the desperation attack. And I think that's why the game got such a hard reputation. I mean, it's plenty cheap, don't get me wrong. A lot of the enemies are designed specifically around being cheap, like Andore's flying butt slam, and 2P's design in general. However, with the desperation attack, it's rather easy to counter this cheapness, and the game expects you to abuse it heavily. Or perhaps they didn't expect you to abuse it heavily, and that's why it took all your quarters. Once you have yourself in the mindset that you need to use the desperation attack constantly, the game is a bit easier, definitely. I still fall into the habit of thinking that the desperation attack should be used as a last resort, as it is called a desperation attack. But even, spamming the desperation attack, keeping in mind that you need to keep your distance from your enemies at all times and abuse your range and such things, the game is still pretty hard. You do need to do all of those things to succeed in this game, but even then the game is still kind of unforgiving because it feels like they push the limits of what you could consider fairness. And it is an arcade game, so I suppose that's to be expected. That being said, I admire the game's cheapness and somewhat absurd difficulty because it forces you to learn the design. Or you could spend all your money, that's always an option too. But everything I would consider a staple of beat-em-up design is here. You have to pay attention to the various enemy designs and their functions and how they work together. You have to keep in mind your range at all times. You have to move around enemy attacks instead of just confronting them head-on. It's all here. It's just also in a rather cheap package. But hey, I'm into that. If you're into more fair game design, well, there are definitely beat-em-ups for that too. But if you're a complete masochist, yeah, Final Fight's right here. And it's really good at that. Unfortunately, aside from the game's difficulty and the way it set up quite a few tropes for the genre, there's not much else to talk about. So after we get through this elevator, we're going to cut ahead. And I mean quite a bit ahead, like all the way to Belger. Belger is riding around in a wheelchair, or at least he was. He was presumably riding in that wheelchair because he didn't want us to fight him. Unfortunately for him, we have no ethics. If we didn't toss him out of the chair, he would have also used Jessica as a shield, but we couldn't let that happen. So Belger's whole thing, design-wise, is that he hops around like a flea because he's cowardly. He also fires crossbow bolts all over the place. It can be hard to get in a good hit because if we punch him normally, he shoots crossbow bolts in the air that will knock us out of our combo. The solution to this is to be standing in just the right spot. It's also possible to punch him before he lands, which is much safer. If we time our punches just right, we can punch his crossbow bolts out of the air, but that is incredibly dangerous. Whenever we need some invincibility frames to get away from his crossbow bolt, we'll be using our desperation attack instead. By far the most challenging thing about this boss fight is, yeah, to make sure you're standing in the right place when he shoots his crossbow bolts in the air. He also has a habit of leaping out of our grabs, so we have to act pretty fast if we want to do anything. Belger is easily the most nuanced boss of the bunch. He has design elements from all of the others, I think, except maybe Abigail. And it's super fun to use the Desperation attack at just the right time and kick him in the face. Unfortunately, he has a rather gigantic health bar, and while it's not a big deal to play it, it isn't terribly entertaining to watch. And now that he's all on his own, we're going to skip ahead just a little bit to where his health bar is a little more visible, at least. So when Belger gets down to his final health bar, he starts to advance toward the right side of the screen, or we could just throw him over there. He does this for a reason, which you're about to see in just a second, after I get overeager and die. Goodbye, Belger. So thank you all for coming with me through Final Fight, which is one of the earliest beat-em-ups, and it set the standard for a lot of beat-em-ups to follow. It may not be the best early beat-em-up, but it's fun, and it's really hard. Enjoy the end credits sequence.